Thank you, Phil. I didn't know how I was going to explain what you did to everybody, but it was the most interesting night I had in a long time. Because as I got up, you know, at my age, you get up in the middle of the night and you have to wander off into the bathroom. So I said, you know, I had this intuition that I should just turn on my computer and see what emails there were on there. And I found an email from Phil. This is at 1:30 in the morning. I don't know when he said it. But I said, okay, this is interesting. But, you know, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this next person. Like Phil said, I've been with this biofeedback device for about 2.5 years. And, you know, having a background in physics and mathematics in college, I like to do a lot of little experiments and test things out. And I could say without a doubt that some things I cannot explain, and then some things are almost just right on that it just staggers my mind. I was explaining to one of the gentlemen here that you know, I know when you take vitamin C, if you really take large doses of vitamin C and don't take it for a while, that you're going to have a vitamin C deficiency and show up in scurvy. Half-life of vitamin C may be a half hour or an hour. So I would load myself up with lots, you know, 20, 30, 40 grams of vitamin C, and I wouldn't take anything for several days, sit on the machine, and it'll show up a vitamin C deficiency. I said, well, this is really bizarre. How does a piece of equipment determine this? And if I lay off my CoQ10, now the reason I'm telling you this is because it's about orthomolecular science that we're involved in here. And you'll see some panels in here that Dave will show that will show how nutrition plays a very important part of this piece of equipment. And the rest of it, I really can't explain. It's beyond my knowledge. Professor Nelson, who developed the machine, at one time he would tell people how it works. He's a quantum physicist. He knows all the equations and everything else, and he would sit and talk to an audience who were eager to learn, and they would stare back at him like it was a foreign language, because it is a foreign language. Sometimes mathematics can be so complicated that it would make our eyes just roll up into our head. But with having said that, I want to introduce this next person, is Dave Cowan. There's only 3 of Dave Cowan in the whole world. Dave Cowan is a master practitioner, trainer. He's worked with doctors, he's worked with nurses, he's worked in hospitals, he's worked with chiropractors. He's very well versed in how to use this piece of equipment. He can explain this better than I can possibly do this evening. I can only tell you stories. Dave can tell you thousands of stories for people he worked with. So without further ado, let's welcome Dave Cowan.
Well, I am very excited to be here, and I want to thank the board for courageously exposing you to me and to this technology. And I do understand that some of the principles that we're going to be talking about may be new. First of all, I need to dim the lights.
Yeah. Just the front lights there, yeah.
This one here? Is that okay for you?
The other one.
Front lights.
Oh.
Leave some on the back. There you go. Yeah, okay.
And I know that there's going to be some burning questions. I have a couple of little things here about this device. But what I'm going to propose is that I go through this program here, this PowerPoint, and explain to you. Oh, here they are. Some of the underlying principles involved in this quantum biofeedback. And I'm going to ask that you reserve your questions, which I know are going to be burning, until we have a question period, because some of your questions might be answered in the context of this presentation. I'm also going to propose that at the presentation, and if we need another short break, to do an actual live demo. As the Chinese adage says, there's a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think it would be very interesting for all of us to experience a demonstration session on the device. The presentation I'm going to give is usually part of a much longer training procedure. I work with training practitioners in the use of this device and have done so internationally for the last 2 years. And we generally dedicate an entire afternoon to these concepts. Again, we're looking at a compression of time here, and I hope to cover as many points as possible in the time that we have. I've also provided for you a quantum biofeedback reading list for those who are interested in investigating some of the documented research, both in North America and in Europe, that will contribute to your further understanding of this material. So let's look at some of the ideas here. First of all, the two technologies that we're talking about are the EPFX and the SCIO, or SCIO system. And these are acronyms for Electrophysiological Feedback Zeroid, which is the base system, the system that is more for personal use. And we have a professional version for health professionals called the Scientific Consciousness Interface Operating System. Essentially, they run off the same software, but the SCIO box, which is what we have here tonight, is a little more sophisticated in that it is actually has built within it a CPU for greater processing capability. So there's some premises here that I would like to outline, premises to energetic medicine generally, and also specifically to this device. And one is that the body is physical, chemical, and energetic. And that biological matter and energy, as Einstein proposed many years ago, are interchangeable. And it's this energetic aspect of biology that has largely been overlooked by Western medical science in particular. There was a reference to a book called Future Science, in which 97 cultural references were made to this human energetic aspect. And so it is not news as far as much of the world is concerned and much of our historical understanding of biology is concerned that there is an invisible aspect to the physical body. This human energy field, which can be measured in terms of voltage, amperage, and resistance qualities, is not a static field. It actually functions biologically, and of course we don't understand all of the functions, but there are certain functions which we're familiar with, and perhaps I'll just outline them now briefly. The first function is that of a developmental template. And I'm referring back now to the work of Harold Saxon Burr back in the 1950s. Some here might be familiar with his work on the L fields. And one of the things he was doing was he was looking at germinated seeds using Kirlian photography. Now bear in mind, this was the 1950s, and Kirlian photography was a Russian technology. Perhaps this partly explains why we don't hear about this.
Oh, is it turned on?
Is the battery gone? Because the light is very low.
Described experiments originally intended to investigate the acceleration of bone breaks from damage to the bones and through the use of subtle electrical fields. But he found that in certain species there was a complete regenerative response to a normal injury, such as a salamander who lost a limb would completely regenerate a complete limb, whereas a frog with very similar physiology was not able to do this. And in his work he discovered that the critical difference between those two species was the moisture content of the skin around the stump, and that this moisture content allowed for the flow of electrons over the stump, which according to Becker's theory, stimulated the physical body to conform to the energetic body. And curiously, we have a phenomena in medicine well regarded, which is the phantom limb effect, where those who have, well, I don't have to explain that one to you, but where people with injuries that will feel pain and will feel sensation in a limb that does not physically exist. The third aspect of the energy field, and perhaps the aspect that's most relevant to this work, is that it appears to be reactive. In other words, it appears to react intelligently to the environment of the organism with signals of attraction towards that which is supportive of its life force, or of its life, of its nutrition, etc., and reacting negatively to that which threatens its life. And we see this in the very simplest of life forms. Single-cell organisms move towards nutrition and away from that which would make it nutrition. So it's this reactive nature of the human energy field is the basis of this type of biofeedback testing. And as we'll see momentarily, we're going to actually challenge this energy field with information that will produce reactions, measurable electrical reactions in the device. So the body does seem to operate fully in a multidimensional universe. We are not limited to our physical being. Life is too complex and dynamic to be reduced to linear concepts. And life's patterns do not repeat predictably. And of course, this is one of the major bugaboos of research, is predictability. Life itself, however, is not predictable, and given the complexity, it is very difficult to design studies where we can actually produce a recognizable predictability. And perhaps this is an exercise in futility. I've often explained an energetic test, much like a test you might perform on a stream in your backyard. You'll go out in the backyard one day and you'll put your finger in the stream, and there'll be certain characteristics of that stream that are going to be consistent from time to time. Each time you test that stream, it's going to be moving in the same direction. And the structure of a water molecule will remain the same, consistent from test to test. And yet other aspects will be totally unique to the moment of testing. For example, the turbidity of the stream, depending on what animal is washing upstream. The depth of the stream, the temperature of the stream, etc. All of these will be changeable from moment to moment and cannot be reliably predicted. So cause and effect, essentially, and that is linear cause and effect, is an artifact of verbal intelligence. And although it operates successfully in many realms, frankly, I view it as a functional illusion. Let's look at materialistic medicine based on these linear concepts. Iatrogenic disease, this is a term I don't think I need to explain to you, death by medical causes, one of the major killers in our society. So a medicine based entirely on materialistic, reductionistic science is costly, ineffective with degenerative disease, and frankly lethal. And of course, this was all reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998 and identified as a primary cause of death in our society. So symptom suppression is not healing, and chemical intervention is not curing. So the true nature of life is beyond Newtonian or Cartesian analysis. The invisible aspect of life is quantum in nature and is beyond measurement and prediction. A natural medicine recognizes humans as an integral part of nature and subject to nature's rules. It was refreshing to hear about the research confirming the benefit of eating nuts and seeds and berries. I don't think our ancestors need to be convinced of that. This was nature's intelligence at work, and we're now just beginning to figure this out. Healing is the result of an inherent feedback loop operating below conscious awareness, and a natural medicine recognizes the critical role of emotions, beliefs, nutrition, and awareness in addressing the whole person. And again, looking at the body, looking at biology purely on a material level, material realm, reduces us to a set of principles that cannot capture the majesty of nature and the majesty of life. And of course, a natural medicine will do no harm. So, we already mentioned the functions of the energetic field as a developmental healing template and a reactive field. So there seems to be a link to these energetic reactions and what some have called in the past the unconscious, that part of the brain which we do not have conscious awareness of, but I prefer to look at it optimistically as the superconscious, and that nature did not make a mistake. So the energy field is measurably electric. Again, we can measure it in terms of amperage, resistance, and voltage vectors. The brain itself is quantic, and this it refers to certain events between the synapses which qualify mathematically as subatomic events. So the human brain is operating not only chemically, not only based on nutrition and based on, again, solid support from a healthy diet, but there are aspects of our function that goes beyond physicality. And these quantic events happening in your synapses right now generate by necessity a field of intelligence, a field of information, a non-local field, according to quantum theory. So the superconscious is the intelligence behind reactivity and explains the incredible accuracy of this device. Reactivity reveals inherent biological intelligence. We're going to look at momentarily some more of more recent research mentioned by some of these researchers here about this intelligence that operates below our conscious awareness, and it is truly awesome. So let's look briefly now at the history of energetic medicine in the modern West. And we mentioned about the rich historical context in the past, referring to the energy field and its functions. And the materialism is a uniquely modern Western view. Dr. Voll was an acupuncturist in Germany in the 1950s, and he set out to validate, through technology, the existence of the acupuncture meridians. This has been a major problem for Western researchers, as they cannot be found to be supported by physical tissues. But Dr. Voll did find that there were measurable differences in the skin resistance over predicted acupuncture points. And he began to correlate these electrical differences with predicting disease patterns, being able to calculate reactions to allergens and toxins, as well as to medications, noticing fluctuations as the energy field expressed through the meridians reacted instantaneously to exposure to toxins or to medications, etc. And he began to use this technology in his practice with a high degree of success. He actually tabulated skin resistance values for healthy individuals of different sexes and different age groups, etc., and began to use these charts as his baseline in his testing procedures. And these devices actually have been in use ever since, primarily through naturopathic physicians and used primarily in allergy and medication testing even today. But Bill Nelson, the developer of this system, looked at this, and perhaps I should back up for a moment and explain why, what piqued his interest in this field. And he was working as a contract mathematician with General Motors at the time where they were working directly with NASA, and he had a son that was born autistically. And when he exhausted what little Western medicine had to offer with this congenital disease, he turned to Chinese medicine out of desperation. And he found that Chinese medicine had much to offer. And I've actually met this young man, who is a very happy, fully functional young adult in his mid-20s, and a good testament to the effectiveness of this early intervention. But Bill looked at Chinese medicine and piqued his curiosity. Well, why is this working, and what is it actually addressing? And he found that Chinese medicine, again, acknowledges and operates on the basis of this energetic aspect of biology. But he looked at these early technologies and realized that there were some inherent limitations. For example, the early devices used a point probe device to make the contact with the skin in order to make the readings, the resistance readings. And of course, the readings were highly dependent upon the operator's amount of pressure, amount of time, the amount of moisture, etc. So there's plenty of room for operator bias in these early devices. As well, there was a limit due to the constraints of a clinical setting as to how many substances could be tested for in a given time. And he was again only measuring one electrical vector, and that was the skin resistance, not taking into account changes in voltage and amperage, which would occur simultaneously. I should mention that research, more recent research in the United States and back in the 1960s in Korea, was looking again at validating the acupuncture meridian system. And they used radioactive isotopes actually injected into an acupuncture point, which were later read on a device which traced the movement of these isotopes up the predicted channels. And so again, there is some validation now available looking at what the Chinese are working with intuitively for over 6,000 years. And actually indicating that these transmission channels are light transmission channels. We're now looking at light more seriously, understanding that on a subatomic level, it is one of nature's most basic nutrients. So with this device here, the SCIO, what Bill proposed to do was first of all eliminate the point probe through the use of these conductive straps. So we now have an energetic test that is truly double-blind. Neither the testee or the tester knows in the moment what is actually being tested for and cannot influence the outcome. He also, by utilizing the computer as the information delivery and retrieval system, has sped up the speed of testing to match the speed of reactivity, which has been established to be around 1/100th of a second, which is the speed of ionic exchange in chemical events. And with the computer's ability to track information at these speeds, we are now testing, currently with the new software, 9,100 substances, reactions to 9,100 substances in about a 3-minute test. We're also, through these head, shoulder, and quadrant straps, now measuring voltage, amperage, and resistance qualities, creating what we call a tri-vector, or a 3D electrical shape, virtual shape, within the computer's memory. How am I doing? Not too fast? Can I? Okay. So, the state-of-the-art technology, again, this is just going over what we just discussed, although there are also about 200 therapeutic choices in the program. So classic biofeedback, which we'll look at momentarily here, essentially is a one-way system, a system that looks at the body's reaction to stress, the subtle stress reactions produced by normal stressors of life. Classic biofeedback is the measurement of stress and the effects of specific stress reduction techniques, such as breath techniques, muscle stretching, and those types of things. The reinforcement of these techniques via positive feedback or conditioning. So a classic biofeedback system is a test-only system with no direct therapeutic application and also is limited to overt physical expressions of stress. And by the way, as biofeedback therapists, we do not diagnose or treat disease. However, we do diagnose and treat stress, which is a recognized underlying factor by the American Medical Association with 80% of our diseases. Quantum biofeedback is now recording and correlating over 9,000 stress tests, reveals both overt and subtle stress patterns. And here is where we go into the truly preventative value of this type of technology. The body will react overtly to a present stressor, but it will react subtly and measurably to a past stressor or a possible constitutional stressor or inherent weakness. And this gives the client information that they can use to prevent future diseases and future conditions. So quantum biofeedback gives us the opportunity to move into a truly preventative arena, with the opportunity also to deliver energetic corrective therapies instantly in an auto-focusing loop. So when we do administer these therapies, the computer is cybernetically measuring the client's reaction and stress reduction signals to these therapies, and then automatically tailoring the therapy for minimum stress and maximum benefit, which is something a human operator would have difficulty achieving. These are safe, effective, and individualized therapies, and also because we're using advanced graphics and a high degree of interaction with our clients in these sessions, is a highly engaging and interactive educational tool. And of course, with this type of medicine, our success rate is really measured by those clients we never see again. There may be 2 or 3 sessions to really address the full spectrum of stressors, but once they have the information, once they have the knowledge and the power to change their lifestyle, I don't expect to see them for quite some time. And that's actually been borne out in my own practice. I do see them eventually, but... So some of the virtual therapies that are included in the system include electroacupuncture, dark field microscopy, a spinal analysis and treatment panel.
What do you mean by virtual therapy?
A virtual therapy is a non-physical therapy using electrical equivalents of changes in the biological structure.
So it's as if you did these actually?
It's as if. Energetically, the results are as if. Sarcodal therapies, which support muscles, bones, nerves, organs, and other physical structures. And again, we're referring here to the basic principles of bioresonance. That is that every cell, every tissue, every organ in the body has a healthy, functional, energetic, or electrical range. And if this range is outside the boundaries of the healthy range, we can assume that there's either over-energized tissue in the case of inflammation, infection, energy, etc., or energetically depleted areas of the body due to degeneration or long-time chronic conditions. And by returning to the body the ideal trivector energy shape or virtual form, we encourage the regeneration of the cell, of the tissue, of the organ to its ideal. In other words, we play along with nature, and we play along with this aspect of the energy field. The organization that I work with also supports practitioners in this technology with 3 levels of certification. Certification through the Biofeedback, Neurofeedback and Biofeedback Certification Board, and also with telephone and regional support for all of our practitioners. This is a new emerging field. It is looking to establish credence and credibility in the world. And currently there are about 14,000 practitioners in quantum biofeedback worldwide.
How many in this room?
Good question. Do we have any quantum biofeedback practitioners present tonight? Great. And how many here, thanks for that question, how many here have actually had experience with this device? Okay, that's great. And if you want to know more about our organization, Aaron Bigelow is in the audience here. Gentleman over
Hello,
there.
everybody.
And he'd be happy to help you later on.
We also have Chandra Giovanni, who's our regional director. So if you are local here, she's a great person to contact as well.
Oh, this is the wrong version. I'll tell you what, I will take some questions now because this is the wrong version and I've got some more information I want to give you. So, while I fix this up, yes?
You talk about how the mechanics of therapy.
Okay, well the different therapies, of course, act differently. And generally speaking, there are 2 orientations or modalities. One is supportive of the tissue, and that is the bioresonant effect that I just mentioned, where we deliver back to the body the ideal form ideal virtual form that is, to encourage the physical regeneration of the body. We can also use these patterns, these signals or frequencies, if you like to call them that, to negate negative issues in the body. For example, if a specific allersode produces a specific energetic reaction, we can take that electrical shape in one of its, say, in its positive expression, and we can reverse the polarity of that and send the inverse back to the body to neutralize the negative effect of that substance. So there's a positive application and, as it were, a negative. Again, we're mirroring the biology. We react in one of two ways, and we treat in one of two ways.
Question.
Yes?
First of all, just because something is non-local does not make it quantity.
Okay.
Secondly, it's clear that when you speak about the brain, at least in normal parlance, when you're speaking about the thing that's above the shoulders, but it's clear that the body has distributed brains, at least another piece in the heart, and as well pieces in the organs which talk to each other.
Yes.
So obviously the body is already having non-local, a non-local brain because it's spread out.
Great, and that's an excellent segue into this section, because we're going to talk about what we understand now, particularly about the extracellular matrix and its holographic information transfer potential. But you're right, something that is non-local does not necessarily make it quantum. The let's fix this up a little bit here. Matrix, which, by the way, I learned a lot by the second source in here, a work by Dr. Horowitz on the DNA, and he's brought together some of the research as new as this year on what we now understand to be some of the more subtle functions of these protein structures in the body, which were assumed to only be performing in a supportive nature, but we now understand that there is an electrical aspect to some of these structures. So the extracellular matrix is the biological basis of electroenergetic therapies. And according to Oshman and Ho, this is actually an unrecognized organ integrating the body into a holographic matrix. It's made of polymeric protein and sugar complexes bound to structured water, forming a gel state. So this is the matrix between our cells, again, which forms a communication conduit throughout the body. The functions of this, I'm sorry?
Structured water.
Yes.
What is structured water?
Structured water is water that is molecularly, optimally molecularly available for binding in living systems. And if observed under the right conditions, it actually appears in a very organized pattern, a highly organized pattern. As structured water can be found in pure natural springs and in the bodies of newborns. So the material functions of the extracellular matrix include nutrient transport, toxin export, endocrine control, and connective support. Its energetic functions, however, include the fact that it is sensitive to weak electromagnetic signals, photon absorption, intercellular and tissue and organ integration. So this is the communication aspect of the cellular matrix. The dipole nature of these structures, that is the actin filaments, the microtubules, and the structured water, allow for living systems to create and respond to coherent electromagnetic oscillations. We're really talking about now the crystalline nature of our biology, and it's the water that provides this crystalline basis. We know that crystals, because of their high level of organization, act as energy receivers and transducers. And apparently we're doing this in our bodies. When biological tissue, and this is a quote from Horowitz now, is exposed to an electrical field in the right frequency and amplitude window, a preferential alignment of dipoles is established which can alter membrane permeability and through the liquid crystal cytoskeleton, that is the ECM, generalize regeneration and healing, causing cell receptors to undergo changes as if the receptor was chemically activated. The Merck Index now, in recognition of this energetic aspect of biology, now lists resonant frequencies for most drugs.
Where does that article be found?
Horowitz?
Yeah.
In his book, which is the second one on the list here, just published last year.
And Mr. Horowitz does what? His background?
He's a dentist
Okay.
and a researcher. Yeah.
Okay.
So healing with via the ECM, injured and inflamed tissue has higher than normal electrical resistance. So this is again an electrical response to a biological function. Enhancing this flow of electrons speeds healing. There is the proper functioning of this ECM is entirely related to nutrition. Quality water and normal protein metabolism, again, establish the viability of this structure. And again, we're seeing now a validation of the ancient Asian belief that blocked energy causes disease, restoring the energy flow promotes regeneration. So perhaps we're seeing East meeting West finally in this arena. Let's look at the DNA itself now as part of this communication structure, this non-local communication in the body. The classic assumption is that the DNA is a static blueprint for bodybuilding and protein synthesis, and this does actually account for about 3% of its functioning. The emerging view is that the DNA is an ideal superconducting antenna. And again, this is due to the observation of these structured water molecules in and around the DNA, and holds the keys to human development and potential. DNA, bound with crystal-structured hydrated lattices, is capable of relaying wave particles of light and sound via ultra-weak laser emissions. Now we know that this form of coherent light is the most efficient form of energy storage and transmission that we've discovered to date. And yet our DNA is capable of operating on this level and is the basis of the bioquantum matrix in the body. I find it very interesting personally that this matrix is also responsive to subtle levels of sound. And this is something that we actually experience all the time when people call our name lovingly. There's an all-body response to being told that you're wonderful, that you're special. And it's not just a psychological response, it's a physiological response based on this research. Yes?
I'm emerging view now. Where did that come from? I mean, what kind of research is behind that? Who did it? And it just seems to me that there would be some pretty sophisticated machines that could do that kind of research.
Yes, it is. And I would have to refer you to the researchers in Horowitz's books to answer that question definitively. I don't have it at my fingertips.
I mean, it's in what sense is an antenna? I mean, it picks up light, right? And then what?
Well, it's capable of holding that information, of transferring that information directly to the DNA to trigger expression, and of also sending that information throughout the rest of the body to where it may be needed. So this again was looked at very early in the 1920s. Yes?
John?
Yeah, through a colleague of mine, Dr. Lau in LA.
Yes.
He's a professor of physics. He's got a scientific extract that explains the meridians through virtually the same type of presentation that you're explaining. Yes. So if anyone's interested, I can get that person in contact with this professor.
That's great. Thank you. Gurvich in the 1920s noted And again, a lot of this research did not receive support. It did not receive support from the pharmaceutically funded universities and medical schools because it did not conform to the model. So some of this research, again, was not necessarily supported or followed up with stringently. Nevertheless, together, it does seem to form a picture. And all of what we're looking at here, of course, is just theory. My 10 years of experience with this device has also convinced me that there are some real principles at work here. But let's go back to the information here. So Gervich took onion cells from the same plant and separated them while they were still alive into two different solutions in test tubes, and the actions produced on one set were recorded or reflected in the behavior of the separated set. And of course, there was no material explanation as for what was going on. And he referred to this communication as mitogenic radiation. And curiously, in this particular experiment, they were actually able to insert quartz crystal between the two test tubes and interrupt the communication. Again, indicating that the crystal structure was somehow absorbing this information and not allowing it to pass, whereas the glass allowed it to pass. Biophotons is another concept presented in the late 50s and later in the 70s, again as a term to explain this communication potential in the DNA. Photosynthesis is the excitation of electrons by photons, whereas bioluminescence, another term for the mechanism behind the biophoton release, is simply the reverse of that process. Energy transferred from a molecular bond to an excited electron and photon emission. So we see that the body simply reverses the process inherent in photosynthesis. So, again, I think we're just repeating some screens here to finish off. Yes, okay, I wanted to include that information as it's a bit more recent. So this brings us to a segue now where I would like to do a practical demonstration of the device. Would anyone here like to see that? Okay, so it's going to take me a minute or two to set up. And perhaps if we take, say, a 5-minute break, I should be able to get going in about, well, 10 minutes at the most. And we'll have an opportunity to explore some of these functions and for you to see for yourself what this is all about.
We have a few mental cases you can work on.
But this is going to be fun, and you know, it's a really exciting practice to be in because, of course, in a truly clinical situation, I would do an initial interview, and I would have an idea of what Stan's issues are, which I don't at this point.
Well, I'll be happy to inform you about that.
So we're going to be going into this blind, and the first thing we're going to do is enter some what we call demographic information. This allows the device to calibrate to things like his age, his sex, this type of thing, and gives the computer some identifying features to work with. So we'll start with that process now. And after this initial data entry, we will do a test. So Stan, what's your last name? Okay, and I'm just going to indicate here his male. Now what we see before us is what's called a suppression and obstruction to cure index. And this is an interview whereby the practitioner helps to determine with the client what are the lifestyle factors that need to be addressed. In the interest of saving time, and of course of not influencing the test, I'm not going to do this at this particular demonstration. But again, Bill Nelson does stress the importance of addressing lifestyle. If we do not address lifestyle factors, things like hydration, caffeine, alcohol use, smoking, etc., the benefit of this session will be severely limited. there is a bioresonant threshold or effect which has been determined to be around 72 hours. So he will possibly feel the benefits of stress reduction for 72 hours, but if he goes back to his former lifestyle issues, he will lose those benefits to a large degree. So again, this is an important aspect of natural medicine, is to stress responsibility and change of lifestyle. I will ask you one question, Stan. How many glasses of water, fruit juice, herb tea a day on average? Great, okay. And let's do one more. On a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being maximum, where would you put your stress level today? Great. Okay. We're now going to require your birth date.
6/3/29.
Okay. That's great. And you were born where? Where were you born?
Philadelphia.
Okay. Good thing I already type with one hand. Okay. Great. And let's just put that on the map. The geography, the birth location, again, helps the computer calculate certain constitutional factors based on where we are born on the globe.
When you say constitutional factors, I have trouble following that. What constitutional factors, depending on where he was, what's affecting that?
Yes, well, someone born, let's say, on the equator is going to express biologically much different than someone that's born near the Arctic Circle. There are going to be certain responses to light changes, seasonal changes, etc., that will be borne out in his physiology. So again, it's a point that's actually more recognized in Chinese medicine than necessarily in Western medicine, but nevertheless does help the device to make certain determinations.
If you're basing it on when he was born and where he was born, what if he moved the next day after he was born to the equator from way up north?
Well, then this data might not be as applicable.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. The point of birth, though, is a particularly unique biological experience. None of us can remember, but our mothers certainly can. And I think there is some credence to what actually goes on at the point of our entry into 3D physicality. But that's just an opinion.
But my low stress is related to California.
There you go.
What did
He
he say?
attributes his low stress to California, living in California. He must not live in Southern California. Okay, the test, I should say the calibration is complete, and what actually happened there, folks, while we were talking, was that the computer made some initial calculations. Let's just go back and see what was actually measured during this calibration process. What we already know about Stan is that his voltage is at 84%, with 80 to 100 being the ideal range, and his voltage largely reflects his adrenal function. So it's very good. And it's consistent with what he said about his stress levels being relatively low. I see his amperage, which reflects brain function, is around 71, and it is a little late. Resistance is at 84, which is great. This reflects the ease of flow of energy and information through the body. So factors like injuries, toxicity, infections, etc., would impact this figure. His hydration potential is at 52, and this not only reflects the amount of water available in his body, but the bioavailability of that water and the viability of your cell membrane structures in absorbing that water, which is very good. His oxygenation is at 83, and again, this is also measuring bioavailability.
You said oxygenation, that says oxidation?
It's a misnomer. Yeah. And we also see his pH and EH at 72 and 62, and again, the difference between those indicates possible or potential imbalance in his body pH. It's not giving us any more detail than that there's a slight imbalance in your pH. Down below here we have the Cellier, the hand cell.
In what respect, though?
In what respect? It's hard to tell at this point. We might get more information when we do the test as to what specific aspects may be out of balance, but generally there is a bit of a discrepancy in your overall electrical pH. Phil?
Now, oxygenation, people who have lung function problems, you
Yes.
test their oxygen function with a simple device that fits on a finger. If someone had that and used it, would it correlate with your measurements?
That's a good question, and I can't say from any experience, but that would be an interesting...
There's another biofeedback device that I use, which is called the capnometer, and it does correlate with that actually incredibly well. So.
It does correlate. When
Okay.
Michael had been hospitalized, and we used the device on him before he was hospitalized, like minutes before they ran the test, we did this, and it does correlate with oxygenation
Okay.
level.
So there does seem to be
I
some...
think that would be a very convincing demonstration if you could show some correlations between testing with this device and testing with other devices. The
Right.
validity is already well established.
Right.
And frankly, I don't think you can do it.
You're on.
Okay?
You know, I'm not exactly sure if Bill did that. I know he looked extensively at other technologies in the development of this, but again, I can't answer that definitively.
Unless you do experiments like that, how do you know what if these numbers are right?
Good point.
How do you rewrite the software?
Right. Yeah, I would agree. We see that overall, Stan is in what we call the alarm and reaction phase, which means generally that he is reacting energetically appropriately to his environment. And it's actually unusual to see adults in this ideal phase. Most adults have adapted to a degree to our stressors and no longer necessarily react significantly to them. So it's quite refreshing actually to see an adult in this particular stress phase.
I didn't understand what you said.
Okay, I should perhaps back up and explain that scale. This is Hans Selye's general adaptive stress model. And essentially he said, and again, looking at stress, we look at all of these reactions in terms of potential stressors or needs for the body. And essentially he said that in an ideal state, we react appropriately and accurately to our environment. And we are sensitive to those reactions and adjust our behavior accordingly. And most children are energetically in that state. It's said that a young child of, say, a year and a half, if you place before them a selection of healthy natural foods interspersed with junk foods, before they're actually conditioned to think of those junk foods as rewards, they will naturally choose the healthy foods. They will react appropriately. But due to stressors and to the degree of reactions that we encounter as we age, some reactions, some issues that become chronic, for example, smoking. A person that's exposed to cigarette smoke day after day after day, their body begins to no longer react to that. It goes into what's called an adaptation. Because in a sense, that reaction is a message to you to become aware of that behavior. And if we are not aware or refuse the awareness of that behavior, we go into an adaptation phase. The problem with adaptation is that the stressor is still working on the body. In the case of the tobacco smoke, it is still affecting our blood, affecting our tissues, etc. So this is the la-la land promoted by our medical system, whereby if I have no symptoms, I have no disease. But according to this model, absence of symptoms does not necessarily mean absence of disease, as these chronic stressors are generally working at deeper non-symptomatic levels. Over time, the deeper aspects of these stressors will emerge in what's called the exhaustion phase. And this is often accompanied by the reappearance of symptoms, but now in a more acute disease phase. So it's a wonderful model to explain and illustrate how disease is the end result, very often, of long-term exposure and adaptation to our stressors. And on the device here, it gives us a quick and easy scale as to how well our clients are interfacing with their environment and taking responsibility.
Reactions only make sense at a given frequency, what frequency are these measurements being made at?
That's a good question, and I can't answer that. He said that reactants only make sense in comparison to specific frequency. Well, that's a good question, and it may be in relation to the resonant frequency of the overall body. But let's look further and see what we can learn. So we're going to do the test. And again, during the test, the device is going to now deliver the energetic virtual duplicates of around 9,100 currently items, that is substances, which are all potential stressors or needs. And in a sense, you could think of a need as a stressor as well, because it's a deficiency in the body. Your energy field will select what it recognizes as its known stressors, and the computer will put them in a specific order of reactivity. We see actually in front of us now the results of the prior test of whoever I tested on this system last, and we see that the reactants are actually categorized according to standard deviations from the norm. And these reds here indicate reactions that are 3 standard deviations outside the norm. And these are the 2 standard deviation reactions. So let's go ahead and test, and I'm going to encourage you to just relax and to be still but not stiff, and to try and refrain from movement, as muscle movement will produce subtle electrical interference.
Dave, are the 4-digit numbers on the far left the numbers of the 9,000 plus tests that you can do?
Correct. These are the index numbers locating all of these items in the master matrix.
You said I don't know, one of them is 2 standard deviations and 1 is 3.
Yes, and there's a single standard deviation category as well.
Which is the 2 and which is the 3?
These are the 3 at the bottom, so the highest reactants are at the bottom of the list. And there is a reactive value. You might not be able to read it clearly, but these are higher values diminishing in reactive score. Now bear in mind that these reactants are not diagnostic. They can be pre-diagnostic. And when we look at these reactions, we cannot think of any one of them as being the basis for a determination, because we are not limited to single cause and effect. And practitioners with this system are trained to recognize patterns. Remember the analogy of putting the finger in the water. We're looking for the patterns that repeat, the patterns that are represented by similar categories of reactions. And the device will actually assist us in doing that, which we'll see momentarily. But let's go ahead and test. May we test? Here is the information that was generated during the calibration process, with a little bit more. And I see down here a cellular vitality index. This is a number, the average is 6, and we see a number 2 here. And it correlates with this information here about oxygen transfer dysfunction. So although overall your oxygen value is within a healthy range, there may be some problem with the actual delivery of oxygen to the cells. And hopefully, and I think I can probably predict that in this short time we will be able to correct that energetically. But we may also want to discover why is it that the cells are not being fully oxygenated. So again, the practitioner needs to have a basis in nutrition, a basis in understanding physiology to make these determinations. Again, in the clinical setting, the device itself is not in charge. The practitioner is in charge, and the client is also playing an equal role. So all 3 aspects are cooperating together to come to certain conclusions and recommendations. And we do encourage our practitioners to continue their education, particularly in natural medicine, in nutrition, in ways and means whereby people can address some of these lifestyle issues and begin to take responsibility. This panel here indicates that the system is electrically active, and there is a slider whereby we can actually manually adjust the voltage should we decide. And this was actually put here for the skeptics. so that we can actually increase the voltage to a maximum of 4, so a person is more likely to actually feel the electrical response on the body, and then we would back it off below that threshold. So this evening I propose to show you some panels. There are hundreds of different pages. I mentioned 200 different therapies, and obviously we're not going to be able to look at the whole program tonight. That would actually take about 7 hours. But I do want to show you the nutritional aspects, as I know that many of you are involved in that research, and also look at the aging panel, which can give us indications of primary aging factors and allow us to do some energetic corrections at the same time. In that, if we can work accurately enough and identify the body's needs, we do not have to hit the body with a sledgehammer in order to get effects. According to homeopathic principles, very often less is more.
While we're waiting, could I ask a quick poll here? How many people, not how many, if you make your living from building devices like this that actually have to work, and otherwise people will die, or a car will go off the road, or the computer will crash. Raise your hand if you are in that sort of a line of work. People in this room.
Are you talking about research and development?
No, people who actually engineering, actually build things. 2, 3. Any other scientists? Or I mean, of that nature. And so, what, you got 5 people here are in that field? 6. So, of those of you, how many of you are resonating with this talk? I mean, how many of those of you who raised your hands, who actually make a living from hard science and technology and engineering, how many of those of you, raise your hand if this presentation is making sense to you?
So I'm not sure what is being measured. See how you're, what the transducing, what you're putting in, what you're getting out, what's the, how you measure things.
Okay. What we did, what we're measuring is his electrical reaction, which is an aspect of reactivity. We're measuring his reactivity to these 9,000 substances here.
How do you challenge him with 9,000 substances?
Okay, good question. Each one of these items was assessed with a homeopathic spectrum analysis device, which looks at physical substances under a vacuum and is able to measure the voltage, the amperage, and the resistance of the subtle energy field of that substance.
Okay, so you have a library in the computer.
Right.
Okay, and then you're challenging, looking to see whether he has anything that looks like that.
Yes, or if his body, in its intelligence, recognizes that, oh, I know that as a stressor. A good example actually was my own son. Many years ago, he moved from a big city back to the town I was living in. Of course, the first thing I did was run him on the device. And to my concern, he showed a reaction to the AIDS virus. I gave him that information, and he said, well, I know my lifestyle, it's not possible. And so we just passed it off as an anomaly. The next day he called me and said, but you know, my boss was in a gay relationship, and his partner just died of AIDS. And before we parted, he gave me a full-body hug. And in my mind, this, to me, satisfied the reason why he recognized AIDS as a stressor, was that his energy field recognized the presence of the AIDS virus in this individual and locked in that as a memory, as an energetic memory. When the energy field, which is a virtual representation of the physical substance, passed by in 1/100th of a second, his body was able to produce a spike of recognition, which produced the reaction.
Okay, so the test here is in whether what comes up here agrees with what he thinks might be in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
Yes.
Proceed.
Yes. I think that's fair.
Can I give you another explanation of the AIDS virus?
Yes.
Is that he joined with the AIDS virus. The AIDS virus was actually within his body energetic field, and he possibly either wanted to help to try to heal that or understand the AIDS virus. So he took that AIDS virus and was in his body field, not that it was going to manifest in what you call physical, but in the subtle energies it was
Right.
present.
And we call these sympathetic reactions for that very reason.
Well, they're not sympathetic. within the individual's energy field.
Okay, thank you.
It's like a blueprint.
Dave, that exact same response occurred to me when my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer. And after being involved with the device, and I was tested, I also supposedly had colorectal cancer. And the same thing was explained to me, namely, I've been living it and breathing it for 3.5 years.
Sure.
And so, you know, it was, I'm not medically diagnosed, but
No.
living it, breathing it, researching it, trying to fight it for 3.5 years, it's definitely in my energy field.
Right, and this is the skill set of the practitioner is going to be crucial in figuring these things out, asking the appropriate questions. Yes.
So you explained how you identify substance and how you can expose the body to it. How do you correlate that to a specific disease? So you have a homeopathic remedy of some sort.
Right.
How do you say, okay,
Well,
this
none
is
of these reactions really are enough information. And of course, I do not diagnose disease. It's not in my,
Not legally
my
allowed.
interest. But nevertheless, a single reaction is not enough of an indication to make a determination. Rather, at the end of this process, we go to what is called the risks profile panel. It's kind of like getting a 9,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and dumping the pieces on the floor, and how do I make sense out of this? So when we have all this data, the first thing we do is attempt to build a framework for the information by looking at all the pieces with the straight edge that have a common feature. And the computer will do this automatically by going to what we call the risks profile and activating this panel. We'll see now an instantaneous calculation indicating that Stan's #1 risk today is his blood.
Really Spanish, is that Spanish?
Yes. Yeah. His #1 area of reactivity is the blood. So that gives me, the practitioner, a clue as to how to interpret those individual reactions and look specifically for the ones that describe blood conditions or blood reactions. His #2 overall issue is environmental stress, blood sugar regulation, food poisoning, which comes up very often, quite surprisingly, perhaps not given the fact that 25% of our meals are eaten out by people who don't necessarily care about us, but it does seem to be a modern subclinical epidemic. Bone issues, here's the pH issue that we talked about earlier. And by selecting one of these areas of risk,
David?
Yes.
It's still on there.
yes, yes,
Now, if you go back,
mhm,
up at the top,
yes,
was cognition and inflammation.
yes, and virus. And is that significant to you?
Cognition and inflammation
Yes.
were relatively good.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Not necessarily. These are what we call the non-reactors. These are the least reacted issues. Now, if you were in the adaptation or exhaustion phase, I would pay more attention to this area. Because being the least reactive categories, these are more likely to be issues or areas that have been long-term, chronic, and that your body is no longer reacting significantly to. So we do pay attention to the non-reactors, perhaps in some cases as much as we do to the reactors. But you are in what we call the alarm phase, so we're going to pay more attention to what your body is actually reacting to, as to having greater significance today. But there is information to be gained from these areas. Again, as a practitioner, we're not limited to these results. For example, if you had told me on your intake form that you're dealing with a serious allergy, well, I can certainly look at allergies. I'm not limited to what we see here on the screen. But we've selected blood as an area for further investigation, and by doing a further test, we'll come up with more information relative to this specific risk. And perhaps most significantly, what area in the body may be most associated with this risk. Right now the information is redundant. Oh, wait a minute, I'm testing virus. Oh.
Relative.
I'm sorry?
No, it's through the blood.
Oh yeah, but it says hint relative to virus. I think I clicked the wrong thing when I went to do the virtual doctor test, but perhaps this is serendipitous, because we see in this retest of the viral risk that the #1 area is the blood. And this is one area which can affect, of course, your cellular vitality. So when I look at your test results now, I'm going to pay particular attention to any viral reactions that may be bloodborne. Okay? Now this other information we can pay attention to if we want, but when we're doing initial investigation, again, we're looking for the general picture.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Certainly.
Judy's parents, 89 and 90 years old, were hospitalized with pneumonia.
Is this your
Both of them.
your daughter or?
Now, Judy is my partner in life.
Oh, okay, okay.
And
Can you all hear him? Would you like to?
Would you like to take this?
so her parents were hospitalized with pneumonia about 3 weeks ago. And they were unconscious for about a week with IVs of antibiotics. Judy went to visit them and came back coughing. And about 2 days later, whatever that was, I got it. And it's only in the last few days that I have become healthy again. So this is totally amazing.
Let's see if we can isolate that virus and actually do a neutralization. First of all, I just wanted to point out the mineral profile. And again, this is a reactive profile. And when we think about this type of data, we cannot think about it in terms of hard information. These are individual probability scales. Again, reflecting your test in the moment. If we tested you 5 minutes later, who knows? We could see actually different figures here. But there is stuff to work with. What we look at, again, are the extremes. We see a high value here for magnesium, again a high value here for calcium, but a very high value down below here for silver, and actually gold. And it's interesting that silver, at least in its ionic state, is one of nature's finest antibiotics.
I use it every day.
Great. Okay. And your body, by this reactive score, is telling me it wants it. That this is an issue that you might want to, at this particular time, increase your uptake for a few days, perhaps.
I'll tell you where I use it. I use colloidal silver mixed with eye drop solution. Put it in my eyes every day.
100%? No dilution?
It's 50 parts per million of colloidal silver.
No, nature's finest antibiotic. Also, I see at a balance in an extremely low score here with nutritional chlorine. And we see that this has to do with the acid-alkaline balance, and particularly the production of stomach acid. So, we did see a slight disturbance in the pH, and this perhaps is leading us to a more focused picture as to what may be going on here. So I'm just going to make a note here regarding stomach HCl, which the production of is I should say, dependent on the intake of certain nutrients, particularly your B6 and your lysine, etc. And if there is a deficiency in hydrochloric acid, this is going to impact protein accumulation in your blood, which may have a correlation with your low cell vitality. So again, we're beginning to see how we can put together a picture out of these puzzle pieces. Generally speaking, though, your mineral status looks good. There's also an imbalance in copper. And copper is very important for a number of functions, particularly the electrical firing of the heart, and also vascular strength. So I would ask you if there's been any situations, some heart palpitations, or problems with varicose veins, etc. So one thing I'm going to check, because he's not reporting any of these deficiency states, I'm going to check what's called Wilson's disease, which refers to too much copper in the body. Again, from this figure, all I can determine is that there is an imbalance in copper. So let's see if there's a copper toxicity picture. I'm going to go back now with some of this information, and of course in a typical session we would be more thorough and check all the relative risk profiles. I'm going to go back now to the test results, and I'm going to use the word search function here to find items in the test results relative to copper. And from this, I'm going to try and locate Wilson's disease. Here it is here. It's where copper accumulates and can actually destroy the liver. So let's do a retest of this individual reaction. We're going to ask the body a second time, do you recognize this? Is this a stressor? Is this a need? So we're doing an individual reaction test on Wilson's disease, and again, this is going to help me determine, should I suggest copper, or should I suggest perhaps some way of chelating the copper and removing the copper load in the body. And I'll make this determination based on one single value here, which is called the rectified score. And basically this rectification number, which is coming along momentarily here, up here, rectified. This is telling me that Wilson's disease is not an issue for you. So this has eliminated to a large degree the possibility of copper toxicity. So I'm just going to make a note here about copper and suggest that perhaps you research copper, look at the food sources, look at the deficiency symptoms, and still consider the possibility of toxicity, but perhaps give it some attention, given that it was an extreme value for you.
How prevalent is Wilson's disease in the population?
How prevalent? I can't answer that. Does anyone know how prevalent Wilson's disease is in the population?
Under a disease dictionary,
Yes.
to give the information, when you pop open disease dictionary under a medical definition,
I think that there's a prevalence information there, isn't there?
Let's have a look.
I can't remember about Wilson's disease.
Yes.
Dr. Fielder says he's never seen it, but it could be done 100%.
Is that right? I have seen reactions, significant reactions to Wilson's disease, but again, these would be not necessarily detectable in the medical test.
Is there anything there that would indicate blood pressure? I would assume not. Are you taking a pulse?
Not physical blood pressure. No. Although, again, there are reactants that will be specific to blood pressure that could lead you to that conclusion.
I can tell you the prevalence is between 1 in 30,000 and 1 in 100,000, according to Google.
Okay.
All right, Dave.
What's the applause?
Good.
The fact that you didn't find Wilson's disease doesn't show us very much.
Applauding Google. But that one in Bumpty-Boo, whatever it is, can be severely impacted by copper Wilson's disease issues because the two twin baby boys that came positive for this, they don't live very long if there's a real copper problem.
And again,
it's not a subtle disease.
No, and let's bear in mind that medical diagnosis is based on overt symptomology. There can be a scale of subclinical Wilson's disease, or any other diagnosed disease for that matter, that can have serious implications and yet not be necessarily medically diagnosed. Yes.
And the other thing that you've already said that I want to emphasize is true is that sometimes these are subclinical. The person isn't even consciously aware yet that there's an issue.
One
Yes.
person indicated that it did indicate that there was blood in the urine. It's a very specific line item in the test matrix.
Right.
And I asked the person, this says that there's some indication here of blood in the urine, and the person said, no, I have no knowledge of that.
Yes.
But I was notified the next day they'd awakened, and having worn white shorts to bed, the blood spatters on the front of their white shorts. So they were not even clinically aware of the issue, but the next morning it was borne out in a physical sense.
Right. And again, the main focus here is prevention. If we can gather this information through reactivity before symptoms appear, we can at the very least energetically balance or minimize the manifestation of disease.
David, would you explain Wilson's disease?
Oh, I'm not a medical doctor. I wouldn't purport to do that.
We don't know what it is.
Well, all I can say is, it's an inappropriate accumulation of copper. It's copper toxicity affecting the liver.
Affecting the liver.
Yes. Yeah.
Could it possibly be just an indication of an imbalance between copper and zinc?
Yes. Yes. Although zinc didn't show up as deficient, but yes, it could. Again, it's a clue. It's not evidence of a crime. Let's look at the viruses now, and again, if I wanted to investigate this further, I can isolate the viral reactions, which we have done here, and begin to go through the individual reactions. I notice that you have reacted significantly to lysine, which has antiviral action in the body, and also we mentioned lysine in connection with the possible hydrochloric acid deficiency. So let's make a note here with lysine.
What is that you said about?
That the body needs lysine in order to manufacture hydrochloric acid. Let's actually go back and look at some more nutritional information on the risk profile. We looked at minerals. We can also look at the amino acid reactive profile. And we see, again, a high value here with lysine. So we're beginning to see similar clues showing up here. A picture is beginning to emerge, even at this very fundamental level of investigation. So we do see a high reaction to lysine, likely indicating a deficiency, and we also see a reaction to glutamic acid, which is needed by the body to supply energy to the brain. It's interesting that cognition was one of those lower-end reactions, indicating there may be a long-term chronic issue with glutamic acid. Again, these are probabilities, these are not prescriptions at this point.
Well, the lysine, I take quite a bit of lysine every day.
Yes. So we may be looking at an assimilation issue. What I've done here, and perhaps there are some cofactors involved as well. What I've done here, and you can see by this number down below, this rectification score, is I've given your body virtual lysine. I'm now giving your body virtual glutamic acid. This does not obviously take the place of a nutrient molecule, but it does remind the body of the metabolic processes dependent on this nutrient. And it reminds the body to recognize this now in your diet, in your supplementation. Again, if we have adapted to a deficiency, the body may not be able to take full nutrient advantage of the available nutrients. So now we've optimized that in your body, and if you're now to follow up with these nutrients, your body will be able to absorb them optimally. Let's give you a little more glutamic acid. Notice the rectified score here is not changing, in that his body is saying more, not full yet, to its optimal state. Here we're up at 80, which is an acceptable level. Another choice bit of information that we can gain at this early stage of assessment is the energetic status or state of the organs and glands. And this will help us to identify areas of inflammation, areas of degeneration, malfunction, etc. By looking first of all at these reactive values, we see that in the immune system there is some stress around the emotions affecting immunity, and there is some stress in the liver. Weren't we talking about the liver? Yeah. We also see some stress in the spleen in its endocrine function. But perhaps taking a more graphic look will give us a better idea of the energetic state of the organs and glands in the body. So here are the organs presently expressing high levels of stress or reactivity, and down below here, these are the areas that are more likely depleted, possibly indicating areas of long-term or chronic stress. From a therapeutic perspective, we have an opportunity, at least on this panel, to do what's called a bottom and top balance. And this is simply to reverse the excess energy in the stressed organs and raise the weakened or lower energy patterns in the depleted organs and attempt to even out the energetic status of the organs and glands. I like this one because it's time-saving. We don't have to do them individually.
Well, why does it say liver immune? Not just liver.
This is specific to liver in its immune functioning.
It's immune function.
Yeah.
And the emotion is immune function.
Right. So we have two immune...
We're talking about a virus in the blood.
Yes. Well, it's never one thing. We're very complex. Okay. And it could very well be that this liver, or this virus is also affecting the liver.
There are a lot of variables in this game, and you can shift around.
That's right. And so again, a lot of this depends on the skill and the training of the practitioner to recognize the significance of this information and to make reasonable recommendations. Yes. Okay. So do you want to? What if I keep treating and we just take some questions?
Well, I think you've done enough. We can generate some questions. I don't know if we need to keep treating.
Okay. I did want to show you the aging panel. Again, what we have here, based on reactivity, is a set of scores indicating factors contributing to aging currently in the body. We also have an energetic tissue and overall metabolic age here. And also what's called quantic decay, which is the degree of entropy that is being limited by consciousness. And this is actually a very good score. The ideal value here is 50. But today, what we see, generally speaking, is your greatest overall aging factor here is a fatty acid supplement. Forget it? You take lots of fatty acids? Okay, well there may be an assimilation issue. And my understanding is that there are over 80 fatty acids in nature. And so perhaps varying our source will also help the body utilize the fatty acids more efficiently.
I think cod liver oil by the blood.
Yes, yes. Again, in nature, we need to look at, how did humans develop? We developed as hunter-gatherers. Our diet was varied from a variety of sources over a period of time. So you may want to look at other sources as well of fatty acids, and particularly balancing your omega-3, 6s, and 9s for optimal. Again, that's not an alarming figure, but it's the highest.
Premature aging from sun.
Yes.
I'm in the sun every day with a hat.
Yes? Good for you.
Bill.
Here's a plug that he should be getting a lot of sun.
Yes. We need it.
Okay. What does that mean?
That's not what, 69? Or 79? That, again, when we look at this set of numbers, we have to eyeball the scale and say, okay, we have a 95, we have an 86 here, we have an 83. 79 is not really, we have a 90 down here. 79 is a high average, so there may be some stress from excess sun, but it's not a major factor. It's not in the top 3 or 4. So it's not necessarily a concern. But I certainly am open to questions in this remaining time.
It seems to me that one of the big issues is the fact that it's pretty hard to imagine that this machine can measure 9,000 substances in the body's reaction to them in about 2 to 3 minutes. Aside from that, but